Hi friends! Welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley Aireonna, joined by the wonderful Steph Sanchez. Steph, the last time that I streamed with Marco, and it was actually on his, he was the one that set up the chat. So he
Mhm.
has like a whole, he was the one introducing it. And he was like, it said live, and I was like, to do my hi friends thing. And then I was like, oh, I don't do that. And I was just, it made me so it's exciting to get to do that this Monday. I want to give a shout out to everyone in the comments. Thanks for tuning in, faithful. Make sure to hit that like button, like and subscribe to both of our channels. My day's going really well. Hopefully the same for Steph. I know she's headed out to training camp in just a couple days, and it really is. It's like the night before camp, the night before Christmas, but the night before camp. Um, really excited with football being back, and feels like we're gonna have some actual, stuff to talk about, not just rumors and what's coming out, but actual football and players on the field and camp battles. I'm really excited. I always feel like training camp is such like a hopeful, inspiring time of the year. It feels like the players have a ton of morale. The fans can really get behind everyone. Every team thinks that they have the chance to get to the Super Bowl. So I'm excited. How are you doing today, Steph?
I'm good. And yeah, training camp definitely has back to school vibes. Like you're excited, right? The idea of school
Yes,
is
back
like,
to school
oh,
vibes
here
is
we go
great.
again, like as a whole, but like the first day of school I think is exciting for everyone even if you don't like school just cuz like you get to see all your friends again, I don't know. It's just that's the vibe that training camp has for me. And as a fan, I don't know if the players feel the same way, but I gotta imagine maybe a little bit.
I totally think so. And with that, we had it announced a couple hours ago that Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch are going to talk tomorrow at 11 a.m. So the media is going to get to report with them. And in that same announcement by Matt Barrows, is where I saw it, he said, and also most players will be there. I found that distinction important because I think there's a very prominent player that is probably going to be holding out. But before we get to Brandon Aiyuk, because obviously he's been the talk of the off season, let's stay on the 49ers. Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch talking to the media first thing tomorrow, early afternoon. And I wanted to ask, what are some questions, and maybe we can, trail into the Brandon Aiyuk conversation through these questions, but what are some things that you're hoping the 49ers media asks John Lynch or Kyle Shanahan to start this new year off?
Well, I know that they're both gonna be asked about the Brandon Ayuk situation. I just hope that the local media not grills them, but I hope they follow up on what we've learned so far. Like the
Yeah.
fact that, Brandon Ayuk said they could have gotten a deal done way earlier in the off season and it could have been for less than what he's asking for now, but because of the market, I really want someone to ask Kyle and John, and maybe it's probably more of a question for John Lynch, why they seem to prefer to wait till like the end of the off season to get these deals done, and why do they feel it benefits them? That's like
I
I think a
love that.
burning
The last
question
one is
that we all
key.
have. The what?
I was gonna say that last part of that question to me is key. Like what do you
What are
feel
you
like you're
gaining?
benefiting out of that? Because from
Yeah.
a naive, and maybe we're not getting it, but from a fan's perspective, it does feel like they end up paying the player what they would have wanted, and so it's pretty confusing to have it draw out this entire time, especially if it does end up impacting training camp, and then potentially could impact the way that the player plays this season, because we've seen that happen with both Debo and Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah,
But
so that's one of the things, and then the other thing, I want to know what Ricky Pearsall's injury is. I want some information on that. They don't owe us that, but we'll probably get some very vague answer as to what that is.
Now, before we get to more questions, Given Brown says what we're all thinking. And Steph, with your, inside scoops of 49ers schedule making, I don't know what else you got under your sleeve. Now, she's going to be at training camp. Is Brandon Aiyuk getting signed when Steph is on her way there so she can be the first to shake his hand? Maybe that's what's going on. Given Brown, always in the chat, great guy, says, Steph, quit jerking us around. You have far too many connections. When does the BA deal get done? Please act like you don't, or please don't act like you don't know. Hilarious. Love that.
I wish I knew. I actually, like, on my show on Wednesday with Desi, like, we made like a bet of when this deal would get done, and my guess was July 18th, and that has passed. Desi was a little less optimistic, and she said August 8th, I believe. So she's still in the running, but I have no idea when this is gonna get done.
Mine is tomorrow. So let's see. My guess is tomorrow.
Your guess tomorrow?
I did, yeah, I said it with Tom, literally like following the Super Bowl because I feel like Brandon Aiyuk started the not drama, but his girlfriend saying some stuff like 2 days after the Super Bowl, maybe even only one day after the Super Bowl. And I remember then being like, this is going to be a narrative all off season. And then they're going to be walking into training camp and it's going to be announced that the deal's done. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen anymore. I feel less and less confident, but man, that would be a big morale booster for John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, who have to face the media at 11, right? If they could switch the narrative and right before that make all the questions just be praise for them finally getting it done.
Yeah, I don't know if it'd be like praise, but yeah, we'd definitely be happy that it'd be done. No, I'm now like really expecting this to, go well into training camp, and I have and I have no idea when it's gonna happen. I'm still like at this point 50-50 that he's gonna either be forced to play on his 5th-year option or like 50% they get a deal done. But I I don't know. We'll see.
So if you think they are leaning towards the 5th-year option, do you think he'll end up holding out into the actual season and actual games?
It's hard to say. I don't think so, just because of how much he's gonna be fined during that time. It's just not, it doesn't make a lot of sense from the player standpoint to do that. But then again, if he really wants to stick to his guns, he could. It's just not gonna be profitable. He's gonna be losing some money in the meantime. So it's hard for me to see it happening, him holding out into the season. I
It
guess
feels like it
we'll
wouldn't
just
be
have
a
to
good
see.
idea for him, right? I've heard a lot of people talk about his stubbornness sounds like a negative word, so that's not what I mean, but he's gone this far. Why would he not kind of really make sure he gets what he wants? But my
Yeah.
pushback to that has always been, have we seen in modern times, at least recently, a wide receiver or even skill position player hold out? The only one that I can think of is Le'Veon Bell, and that was horrible for him, right? That like pretty much derailed his career. He's done interviews since then and blamed a lot of his fall off because of taking a whole year off and everything. And I know that Ayuk wouldn't be taking the entire year off because you have to accrue the season, but he can take up to 11 games off. And with those penalties, then it's like, well, you might as well have taken the 26 million because you're going to be fined more than $2 million but if you end up holding out. And maybe it's just for like the purpose of it all. I'm blanking on that word, but I could see Chris Jones held out for one game. My only problem is even if this lasts till game one and they pay him like Nick Bosa right at the end of training camp, then what scares me is he going to be in football shape for game one against the Jets for the next couple games? Are the game plans going to be reflective of him? How's his connection with Brock Purdy going to be? all these things are important. I think, especially after seeing Nick Bosa, potentially after Debo having a down year, we heard lots of talk. Well, Debo always struggles with his weight, out of shape, whatever. But then we saw that same exact formula happen with Bosa, someone everyone was very confident that he was going to be working out on his own, putting the time in. And he reiterated that he did do that, but that there's something very specific to, in his case, it was training his hands against a guy like Trent Williams. But with Brandon Aiyuk, there is something that it to me that's important about being in football shape specifically. And if you're the 49ers, and this is, in my opinion, kind of a do or die year, not saying that the window with Brock Purdy won't, stay open, but with this core, this is the final year. Like, we're going to talk about Juice later, but so many of these veterans are not going to be on this team in 2025. It just doesn't make sense if they're grappling over $2 million to not make sure that your player is in training camp. Because I mean, even if he started today, he's going to have to ramp up what he's doing, and at least he'll be kind of on pace with the other guys. That way, for preseason, he can actually play the games that the veterans are supposed to play, hold out and protect his body for whatever, because Kyle usually doesn't play them all the games. And then come game one, he's off and running. I mean, a big reason why fans are saying that Ayuk should be paid is because of his production. Well, what if he's not able to repeat that production because he held out and, had to start slow when he did finally start playing again?
Yeah, which is why I think like there is some risk on the 49ers side, and them kind of waiting for Brandon Ayuk to blink first, right? Because if it doesn't happen, the things you mentioned are definitely something that could end up hurting the team, right? If he does end up holding out, even if it's just a game, even if he gets signed before week one, like these are things that are going to impact Brandon Ayuk and his performance potentially for the first couple weeks of the season, maybe longer, who knows. But yeah, I think those are some real concerns. I've seen a couple of people mention this today actually, like both Pat McAfee and Kay Adams brought this up on their respective shows. And they said one option the 49ers can do is like give him a 1-year deal that pays him 20 million plus. The number Kay Adams said was like 25 million. Like, let's just say, because the 49ers, I believe, have a little over 31 million in their cap right now. They're under the cap. And so they could do that. That would then erase his franchise tag going forward. So he'd pretty much just be on this 1-year deal. Let's just run it back, see what happens after that. But I think that'd be smart. If the 49ers have any reservations about signing Brandon Aiyuk long term, I think that would be a good like alternative, just because it keeps Brandon Aiyuk happy and gets him in the building, for 2024. And that you need Brandon Aiyuk if you want to, get a Super Bowl in 2024, right? Like you feel very strongly about that. So yeah, I think it could potentially like that would be a short-term win-win for both sides. And so I wouldn't even leave that off the table if I'm the 49ers. Like, because at this point, it just seems like they're like, yes, we keep hearing they want to get a long-term deal done with Brandon Aiyuk, but if they can't agree on a long-term deal and what that annual number should be or what the guarantee should be, that's just another way they can make it work. But who knows?
I like that idea. I think, like, I guess what I wouldn't understand about that is it feels like the 49ers probably want Brandon Aiyuk long term. They just don't want to pay him that much right now. So it feels like they'd kind of be getting like the least of, like, how everyone says the best of both worlds. It's like they're not signing him to a long-term deal and they're still paying him more than they anticipated on paying him. It feels like they either want him short term for cheap, and even if they made him play out his 5th year option, to me, from everything that we've heard from Matt Mayoko's talking and articles by like Mike Silver and stuff, and maybe this would be a good question as the title of this topic is questions for Kyle or for John Lynch is it your goal to keep Brandon Aiyuk long term, even if you want him to play on the 5th-year option right now? Because that was kind of my interpretation of what was going on, is that maybe they weren't up to pay him the 30 if he's asking for more than we know that supposedly they offered him 26. I think that they should offer him up to 28, but maybe if they're not ready to do that yet. I was not under the interpretation, even if they made him play out his 5th-year option, that they would necessarily want to let him go. Now, I do think if they made him play out the 5th-year option, Brandon Aiyuk would want to go because it would be done for him. But I think that that's my only pushback with that deal that Kay Adams and Pat McAfee suggested. Although maybe with the higher number, it helps appease Brandon Aiyuk, and he is more likely to come to the negotiation table next year. I'm still of the opinion that they're going to get him signed. I think I would just be very frustrated if he ends up signing for anywhere between 27 and 29 million dollars not tomorrow. Like if it bleeds into any long, multiple weeks of training camp or the preseason or even to the regular season, I would be extremely like at this point, I feel like once the draft passed, the 49ers should have committed to paying Brandon Aiyuk. Is that fair? I mean, I understand that the 5th-year option exists, but it feels like that only exists for players that the team doesn't necessarily prioritize. I know in the Bengals, T. Higgins he's being made to play on his 5th-year option, but then you look at a team like the Dolphins and they're paying their second wide receiver because I think a lot of people have been like, well, BA's only proven that he could be a number one wide receiver 1 year. Well, Jalen Waddle just got paid $28 million this offseason, and he's obviously a number 2 to Hill. And it's kind of the same. I mean, obviously they're different players, but it's the same situation as Waddle is younger than Hill, and so maybe better long-term for the team to have a guy like that. And I'm not trying to age Hill. I just mean he is objectively younger and so potentially has some more years in him. And I think it's interesting that, and obviously the front offices and the GMs have more to do with this than just the coaches, but that Mike McDaniel, who was under Kyle Shanahan, kind of, I always find it interesting to look at the like little tweaks that the coaches that have worked under Kyle end up making, whether Sean McVay invested a lot more in his passing game, maybe than Kyle Shanahan. And then over in the Dolphins, it's like they got the deal done right away, which you were just saying that Brandon Aiyuk mentioned earlier this offseason, he was ready to sign until some of the other wide receivers ended up having their deals done before. And he was like, okay, well, my price just went up then. And I think that's fair. I think these guys want to feel wanted and supported by the team that they feel like they're sacrificing their body for and committing to. And I don't know. I really hope that the media members really press them on this negotiation strategy because it doesn't feel like they win. I think potentially it would feel worth it. I mean, I would still argue it's not worth it, even if they got deals, because their players aren't performing well once they put them through this tumultuous offseason. But maybe if they were saving millions of dollars, it would make sense. But it feels like they're not even saving money. So they're just like sabotaging their own team. I don't really understand that.
Yeah, again, at this point, I don't know what the 49ers are like fighting for. I mean, yeah, it just seems like a couple million, if anything, like you said. But then again, we don't really know what the bottleneck is at this point. What was interesting is that earlier in the off season, maybe like a month or two ago, Mike Silver had that report that the 49ers offered 26 million, and then Mike Florio this past week said that it like 49ers offered or Brandon Aiyuk was wanting 28 million like earlier in the off season.
Yeah.
So that was the number he wanted earlier. Now that number has increased. So yeah, I mean, 28 million is still higher than I maybe thought that number for Brandon Aiyuk was going to be. But now it's a little bit more. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was interesting to hear.
I definitely think that's interesting. Okay, now, and by the way, Gammon, thank you so much for the warning. I'm hoping that there's no echo and it gets fixed. It could be my speakers, but I just checked them. So hopefully it's going to be better. And then really quick, Stovey says it's going to be all boring answers. Well, that's why I kind of said I do hope that the media takes like an approach where they're more together. We've seen them do that before. I know not all the times, and there's been times I feel like it's very understandable to criticize the 49ers media because sometimes it feels like they're supposed to be the voice of the fans and let the fans know what's going on, and they don't. But we have seen, especially I think it was the Debo negotiations, them kind of all come together and be like, hey, you need to address this. And they haven't spoken to either John Lynch or the coaches since that trade request by Aiyuk was like announced to everyone. So hopefully they really will, for lack of a better word, come together with like unity and not let the answers just be like, oh, I don't know. Like, I would also like someone to ask, because I remember Kyle Shanahan when he was addressing why he wasn't worried about the trade request with Debo being asked for and getting a deal done. Kyle said, well, Debo and I are friends and I haven't called him yet. And so it felt like there was
All you
like,
need to do is call him. It'll be fine.
and like, I don't even know, like, I think when he said that, I kind of rolled my eyes, but at least it felt like maybe Kyle had a feeling of if I need to, I can step in and fix it. And I don't necessarily know if Kyle feels like he has that relationship with Aiyuk. And this is obviously a heavily speculated topic amongst media and fans. But it does feel like there has been, over the course of his career, some contention, also some celebration between Kyle and Aiyuk, and I would wonder if Kyle feels like he has that same sort of relationship where if push comes to shove, Kyle feels like he could call Aiyuk and really get him to calm down and feel wanted. Because I don't necessarily know if they have that same connection that Debo and Kyle do. Have you thought of that? Do you think that that would be a fair question? Like, Kyle, are you confident that if you uh, need to get involved, that you could have a resolution between both sides or something like that? It's not worded correctly or exactly right, but I hope a media member maybe brings something like that up and asks.
I think they did ask something similar, like during the draft, because knowing the history of him kind of stepping in with Debo when it came to the 11th hour. Now, yeah, I think you're onto something. I don't think like him and Ayuk have the same. They're not as close as I think him and Debo are, but I still think Kyle has enough influence that he can call Ayuk in this situation and mend some things. Like I don't think it necessarily needs to be the same exact relationship that he had with Debo for him to be able to do that here.
And this is once again speculation, but do you think, because I've heard people go as far to say that Ayuk is pretty unhappy with his relationship and how he's been treated with the 49ers. But I would wonder if that relationship has progressed over time. Obviously, he had that doghouse year in the beginning, but it felt like last year Ayuk had a lot of accomplishments. And when asked about Brandon Aiyuk, Kyle Shanahan has brought those up and congratulated him on his progress. Now, obviously, the coach isn't going to come out and be like, this isn't a good player and I don't like him, but it felt genuine to me. Do you think it's possible that, I don't know if repair is the right word, but that their relationship has kind of progressed as Brandon Aiyuk has come out of his shell a little bit? Maybe Kyle understands how to better communicate with a guy like Brandon Aiyuk, because I think you're right. There's personality differences between Aiyuk and Debo are pretty stark. It feels like right away Debo and Kyle had a connection. Debo also once again speculating personalities, but feels a little bit more outgoing, where Aiyuk can come off reserved, which if I'm blanking on it could come off as like maybe egotistical or something like that if you're not interpreting it right. Like shyness can come off as I don't like you. Being reserved can come off as mean or distant, even if it's not actually meant that way. And so maybe they just like had different communication styles. And over the last entire rookie contract, you would hope if Kyle, is good with people, that they would come to a better way of, talking about those things. Because Brandon Aiyuk is a
Yeah.
first round guy. Like that's not a relationship you should take for granted.
Yeah, I mean, I think they, like I said, I think they have a good enough relationship to be able to mend things from the player and coach perspective of all this. And I don't think Kyle and Ayuk's relationship was ever hurt by these negotiations because like Kyle isn't a part of it, like it's probably Parag and maybe John Lynch. I don't know, but probably mostly Parag. Again, I'm just speculating, but
John Lynch
whoever
actually,
involved in the negotiations and actually like telling Brandon Aiyuk and his representation this these reasons 1, 2, 3, how many are why we don't think you should get paid that much. Whoever that was that is responsible in these negotiations for relaying that information to the other side is probably the one that has like the hurt relationship with Brandon Aiyuk right now. But I mean, those are guys I think you probably only deal with when you're going through these negotiations anyway. So I don't think it's going to hurt his relationship with his teammates. I don't think it's going to hurt his relationship with his coaches or anything like that.
I agree. And then I feel like Justin, it's straight to the point, but I agree that this thing should be faced with some urgency. Pay the man or trade him. I'm on this level now, and I don't really know how it's funny what a deadline kind of does to your emotions, because I feel like a month ago, maybe I was like, oh, the 5th year option doesn't seem that bad. But now that these things are like coming up, I'm like, no, like we need a solution. My issue is if they were going to trade him, doing it after the draft just seems negligible and like they're going to get some pushback because, in my opinion, if the only way that they would trade him this year is, and someone asked up here, I know it was a rumor last week about Devontae Adams, but it would be for something like that. Like I would want the 49ers to get a future pick or a future like 1 and 2 and hopefully like something right now that they can use. Like I said, this year is the year that needs to matter. I understand like having kind of like a far off vision for the future and that you can't completely disregard that. But to me, I feel like the 49ers should be going 100% all in. And I know we say this every year, but to me, this year more than ever, they're about to have to reframe their entire payment strategy where all the way up until this time, they've been organizing a team where you pay the stars, you pay the quarterback nothing. Once they pay Brock Purdy, everything's going to have to adjust. And obviously, that cap hit isn't going to hit totally immediately, and they're going to be able to keep some guys, but it's going to look like a much different team. So I think more than ever, they need to be focused on this year. And so, unless you're getting a star, impactful player, like a guy who, no question, knock on so much wood without injury, is going to make as big of an impact or better than Aiyuk makes, then I don't think you let go of Aiyuk. And if that's the outcome that the 49ers are coming to in their own head, then pay him now. Because if it's anywhere from $1 to $4 million difference to me winning a Super Bowl or having a much better shot at winning a Super Bowl is worth that amount of money. And I just don't I feel like I've explained that before, and I don't understand how they don't see it that way, which is why I am hope that they're pressed on answering a question similar to that tomorrow. But yeah, I
And
agree. What did you think about the Devontae Adams rumors? Would you be opposed to an Aiyuk for Adams trade? How do you feel about that?
I think that was the one scenario where I'm like, okay, I'm listening. And it was just a rumor, right? But, that one was one I wouldn't shut down because if the argument against trading Brandon Ayuk is because, oh, well, we have 2024 and we got to win now and we can't trade away something that helps us win this year, you can argue Devontae Adams would help the team even more. Maybe it's incremental, right, in the grand scheme of things, but I mean, that yeah, I would definitely like
Is
to see that if possible.
is Devonte Adams, in your opinion, better right now? Not talking about next year or the year after that, but just this upcoming season, or
Yes.
even considering last season, because obviously this season hasn't started yet. But do you think he's as good or better than Ayuk right now?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. He has been. He will. And I think he'll always be. Um, that's just how I
Okay, see,
feel.
this is I like that you feel this way because I got a little bit of pushback on Twitter for this last week. And I wasn't even sure if Devonte Adams will be better than Ayuk next year. But once again, my main worry is, are the 49ers going to win the Super Bowl this year? And so I was thinking, if the 49ers right now aren't sure that they want to commit long term to Brandon Aiyuk, so they're only focused on 1 year, then I'd rather have 1 year of Devonte Adams than 1 year of Brandon Aiyuk, and then you
Mhm.
just have to deal with next year, which is what
Yeah.
they're, if they make BA play on the 5th year option, they were already going to have to do that. You might as well. I mean, Kyle Shanahan, we think of him as an elite coach. We think of Brock Purdy as a really great quarterback who finally had an entire offseason. We'll talk about in a second, or we can talk about it now. There was a report. I don't know how much of a report. I'm blanking on his name. I know he went to a couple of days of training camp last year. Bretman Coleman, what's his name? Brett
Oh,
Coleman,
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yep.
guy. He went on his podcast and said that he heard that Brock Purdy was injured and rehabbing from injury all the way until the middle of last season. So not just during training camp, not just during game one, but that he was continually rehabbing his injury, which from I'm a former athlete and nothing, professional, but just college athlete. I remember having off seasons where you rehab, and even when you're better, you're still doing your mobility and training because you don't want to re-aggravate that for quite a while. So it made sense when he said this. But before I get off track, this offseason, Brock Purdy got to watch a full year and plus worth of tape on how defenses adjust to him. Those games that for us as fans are hard to look at, the Ravens games, all those, he could learn from those games. Kyle Shanahan got to watch them with him, somehow didn't watch them before the draft and realized that maybe the offensive line could be improved. But besides that, once again, off point. I think that Brock Purdy, even if it doesn't show up statistically, will end up being better this year as long as the rest of the team performs at the level that we expect them to. There's no major injury. And so a healthy Brock Purdy, Kyle Shanahan, and the stars on this team with Devonte Adams, to me is like, if you don't win a Super Bowl, I don't know how that, like, that's
Yeah.
how do you
Exactly.
win a
Which
Super
is,
Bowl if
I mean, that
you don't win a Super Bowl doing that?
Yeah, exactly. And that's your main end goal, right? Is to win a Super Bowl. And I feel like this team has tried so many different things and improving here and there, but they just can't get over the hump. I think like someone like Devontae Adams does help them this year. And like I said, maybe even a little bit more than Brandon Ayuk, just because that's how good Devontae Adams is.
And people have talked about, like, Devonte Adams is used to a certain number of targets, X, Y, and Z. You don't get that at the 49ers. My retort to that would be, we never saw, and we've, seen Kyle kind of play favorites from time to time, but we've never seen production like Christian McCaffrey. It feels like when Kyle gets a crush on someone, he really likes to feed them the ball. And I think if the 49ers traded for Devonte Adams, Kyle would be very motivated to get the ball in his hands. And I think the rest of the stars, like I think the other teammates would buy in too. Don't you think if they traded Brandon Aiyuk for next year's second-round pick, you could get some George Kittle, Trent Williams, maybe like some guys that are here for 1-2 more years, towards the end of their career. They could be like, what the hell are you doing? You trade for Davante Adams. They're like invigorated. They're like, we've said we're all in before. We are all in. We heard Nick Bosa, I think, said something about that, similar to that when they traded for Hargrave. In my opinion, the Adams trade would be blow that trade out of the water. So I would be all for the Davante Adams thing. I like that, like talking to you about it made me like more excited, because I feel like I was excited about it, and then I went on Twitter. I felt like it was poo-pooed, and I was like, okay, maybe I'm like hyping up an old dude. But then you were like, I think he's gonna be better for more than just a year. And I'm like, I'm back on the trade. I do think if they pay Brandon Aiyuk tomorrow walking into training camp, that same invigoration will happen within the team. But yeah, that is one trade that I would find acceptable. Now, a trade / a offer that I would not have thought was acceptable, that luckily the 49ers didn't choose. However, if they do end up trading him for like a future pick, maybe I'd be pissed that they didn't pick it up. But there was a rumor that the Patriots offered pick 34 this offseason of the draft. Do you think that the 49ers were right in not accepting that for Brandon Aiyuk?
I'm kind of like where you're at, where if this deal eventually gets done for Brandon Aiyuk, it's like, yes, because if your intention is to keep him, then fine. But if this goes left, that's any point like between now and the start of the season, and we don't see this deal happen, then yeah, it would be a little tough. But then again, like I think the 49ers were really like they really wanted a first round pick for Brandon Aiyuk. 34 is like, I mean, it's an early second, but it's still a second, so they wanted someone, again, like you want someone who you feel confident could help you win now. And that would probably need to be a first round pick, and probably like in the 20, I would say like 25 and below range, like 25 to like 15 range. And that you're probably like, Steph, that's crazy. That would never happen. Well, exactly. That's why we didn't see it happen. But I think that's what the 49ers would have taken for Brandon Aiyuk.
I agree. I think the problem is BA outperformed his draft position. So it was going to be hard, and the 49ers, the front office, I think would have gotten a lot of pushback for accepting lower than where he was originally drafted, because it does feel like he's lived up to his position, if not outperformed that. So I think it would have caused some pushback then during the draft when it happened. And I think right now is at the same time we're discussing this, I think that we would have been discussing, like, would this team be better with Brandon Aiyuk? Who is it? Whoever they drafted would have a huge spotlight on them, because much like we're saying the only trade that we would consider is Davante Adams, we want whoever was going to fill that spot to be as good as Brandon Aiyuk or better. The only way that I could see that trade making sense is they had 31, and then if they would have got 34, could they have gone into the teens with, like, could they have traded up? And that's kind of just a question, right? Because it's hard to trade up. Teams like didn't want to trade back in this year's draft in general.
Well, also it depends on the timing of when that trade was made. Like if the Patriots made that trade at the end of round 1, then like that doesn't help you for being able to move up. And if I had to guess, that's probably when the offer was made, like at the end.
I didn't realize that. That makes sense. Yeah. If it was like the day before, it could have worked.
Yeah.
Because then that was the only thing I was thinking is, like, I think Mintz actually ended up going a little bit earlier, but I think there was guys between like 12 and 16. There was some offensive linemen that I remember I was still like kind of during the draft being like, are the 49ers going to move up? Like, can they do it? And a lot of that also was just other teams not wanting to trade back, and those positions are valuable. So different teams wanted to draft those players. But that was the one time that I was like, I could see if that offer was made prior to day one, the 49ers maybe could have taken that if they knew they weren't going to extend Brandon Aiyuk. But I agree with you. If it was made like in real time, I could see them being like, no one here is going to be better than the immediate impact of Brandon Aiyuk.
Right.
49ers media really quickly says, hey, Ash, hey, Steph. And then says he prefers Brandon Aiyuk because he's younger. He's not on Adams. I understand this from a longevity speaking wise, but I have mentioned this multiple times, and Steph has too throughout the show, that this year, like if they won the Super Bowl this year, I think you'd be more willing to let them. Sorry, I think there's like a blender going or a leaf blower in the background. Sorry if you guys hear that.
I can't hear it.
But I think winning a Super Bowl this year, Devontae Adams maybe gives you a better chance. And it might even be nice to see Brock Purdy with a guy like Brandon or with a guy like Devontae Adams, see Kyle Shanahan with all the weapons. Because maybe that then, if they don't win a Super Bowl, it really makes you look at your team and be like, okay, we're already going to make major changes, but maybe we need to really make changes. Like maybe we're not paying Brock Purdy. Maybe we're, putting Kyle Shanahan on the hot seat early. And I'm not trying to say to do this, but I'm just saying if they had Devontae Adams, I think it really would. It's already a make or break year and it would hype that up. But I understand what you're saying with Aiyuk probably having more longevity just because the ages that they're at right now. And then I want to get to this because I know you have a show coming up pretty soon. But Gammon Brown with another super chat says, what's your favorite and worst part of the off season? And I'm wondering, does he mean just off season in general or this particular off season?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I take it he means in general, but we'll see if he chimes in the live chat and we'll pivot based on that. But I'm going to answer based on just in general. And the worst part of the off season for me is that it goes by so slow. And I hate when we're close to training camp. This happens every year. When we're close to training camp, people like gaslight me and say, "Oh, wow, like it's already here. The off season went by so fast." Like, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. Like, are you kidding me? And this literally every year. It's excruciatingly slow. And my favorite part, though, at the same time, is that it is a change of pace for me, right? And like as a content creator, I don't feel like I have to put out as many shows. And so it's nice to take a bit of a break and slow down a little bit. But then sometimes it gets too slow.
Specifically, you like incorporated some fun stuff into your channel, which I know just as a fan of your channel has been cool for me to watch. Maybe I don't know if you've done that in past off seasons, but I liked that.
I haven't. And so that was kind of my way of not making the dead period between OTAs and training camp like so boring, because it is really boring. And like usually there's nothing happening. There's been a lot of like Brandon Aiyuk stuff to talk about, but aside from that, like there's nothing new. So yeah, that was just kind of my way of filling the time a bit.
I like that. My favorite part of the off season would have to be, and not just this year, but this time every year. I think as a fan, I get really excited going into training camp, and every year there seems to be different storylines or positions that I'm looking at, and I can kind of hype myself up and tell myself why the 49ers are going to win it all again. And unfortunately, for the last couple seasons, I want to say the worst part has been the start of the offseason because it's followed some horrible loss that I wasn't really anticipating. But it's been really fun to, like you said, try new things and work with everyone and do that. But I think maybe that's kind of cliche, but I think the intro into football season is really fun for me when you get to start the rookies start doing interviews, the veterans come up and you see them taking their next steps in leadership and how in shape they are. You get to hear the media kind of grilling the coaches and hyping yourself up. I love the schedule release. I'm such a schedule release person. I love trying to predict the wins and losses I know that that's silly, but I always do that with my dad. So I think that that's probably my favorite is the schedule release, and then this time of the year when you're starting to hype yourself back up. And yeah, under Kyle, the last couple of years, I feel like the worst has been just the start of the off season because it's always been came with some like what the hell just happened shock. So yeah. And then I'll say one more thing before I let you go. Everyone, please make sure to like and subscribe. This has been nice to talk to everyone. I know everyone else I feel like likes this time of the season too, because we have a chat full of people. This isn't a make or break year in their eyes. They're planning on being good for a long time. They will sign BA. Sadly, they're taking a long time negotiating. Kyle finally found the QB he's always wanted. I understand maybe your points with like Joe Burrow said something like this, right? Like the Super Bowl window is open as long as I'm the quarterback type of thing. And maybe for the 49ers, they feel like as long as they have a healthy, competent quarterback and Kyle Shanahan, there's a Super Bowl window open. I would argue that as a fan of this team in the Kyle Shanahan era, that there's core players that I really hope win a Super Bowl because I think it's been so much fun to watch them. And I want their legacy to actually, be cemented. And it was hard to see Jimmy Ward go for that reason. And I'm hoping for guys like Trent Williams, George Kittle, that this is a make or break year. And I think to some extent with a team this good, every year is a make or break year. But with that being said, I want to throw people over to make sure to like and subscribe to Steph's channel because she has a show coming up right after this. Make sure to tune into my channel. I'm going to be going live tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow with Tom Jensen from SI and later on in the week with Marco. And then Steph and I are going to be switching it up a little bit because she's going to be working on her channel a lot. But hopefully we'll be able to do, many more shows throughout the course of the off season and next season when there's time. Had a wonderful time working with you, Steph.
Yeah, me too. And yeah, I mean, I know that you like started your channel and I was kind of like one of the first people to be like
You're
your
the first
guests
person I
and like
stream with. I really appreciate it.
yeah, so that was awesome and that was a huge honor for me. So yeah, definitely gonna continue to see the channel grow. And yeah, I'm always down to do a one-off show here and there.
Heck yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Like I said, lots of stuff on this channel coming and Steph's as well. So thank you guys so much for tuning in and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye guys. Have a good one.